DHCP is something that most people take for granted. But how does it work and how do you set it up? I'm disconnected, I plug in my network cable, and I just sit back and wait a couple of seconds and expect to be online. In this video, we're going through what happens in the background and how to set it up on Windows Server. First of all, DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So it's pretty nice if we can use the abbreviation instead. We have a pretty basic scenario here. We have a router or DHCP server, which is what it is in this case. And we have two clients connected. Client number 3 will be connected in just a few seconds. We have some basic configuration to go through here. The DHCP server has a table containing the client's MAC addresses, which is of course unique to every client. That's tied in with the IP address that has been assigned by the DHCP server. And you have the lease time. The remaining lease time is how long it will take before the clients need to renegotiate the IP address. There are also some configurable properties here. The DHCP range are the addresses that are available to the DHCP server. In this case 192.168.1.50 to 99. We also have the lease time. That's how long an address is reserved for a specific computer. Default is 8 days, but in this configuration example it's actually 8 hours. It doesn't really matter in a home use scenario, you could probably leave it at 8 days, but if you have, for instance, a business where people go in and out a lot, leaving it at 8 days might cause you to run out of IP addresses, depending on what scope you have to work with, so set it up in a way that works for you. When the third client is connected to the DHCP server, or the network where it resides, it will talk to the DHCP server by going out on the network, sending a message to everyone saying that, "Hello, I'm new here and I need an IP address." The DHCP server, of course, is configured to listen to exactly that message and will respond giving the client the IP address to use. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but for now we'll just try to keep it simple. It will also inform the client that it will need to renew its IP address in 8 hours. When the lease time is about to expire, what will happen is called DHCP renewal. The client will actually talk to the DHCP server and tell it that I'm still here, can I keep my IP address? And if all things are working as they should, it shouldn't be a problem for the client to keep the same IP address, and that way it won't interrupt network traffic. You can also add DHCP reservations. This means that if client 2 has a reservation for the IP address 192.168.1.51, that MAC address will always be tied to that address no matter what happens. So if the client is offline for a week, 2 months, a year, it doesn't really matter. The DHCP will keep that reservation for the client until it's online again. That's the theory of DHCP. Let's head over to my DHCP server and show you how it works in action, before we go ahead and try to configure our own DHCP server. We are now connected to Kiwi File 01. This is my file server, but I also use it for a lot of management, since it's one of the few servers in my environment that actually has a GUI enabled. We're currently connected to my domain controller, KiwiDC01, which has the DHCP role installed. For some reason, my Synology NAS also shows up in this list, but of course that doesn't run DHCP, at least not in a way that's managed through Windows. If we expand IPv4, we can see some more of our current configuration. We can see that we have one scope configured. That's all that I use for home, and it's fine for me. If we expand the scope, we can go in and look at the address pool. These are the addresses that are available, and as I showed you in the presentation, it ranges from 50 to 99. Addresses outside of this scope cannot be assigned by the DHCP server. Going into address leases, we can see the computers that are currently leasing addresses from my server. For instance, we can see some Windows phones here and a bunch of other computers. You can also see the lease expiration, which is at least a couple of days away, so things seem to be working just fine. We have one reservation for a computer that I can't remember at this time. Doesn't seem like I configured a name for it, but for some reason I created a reservation for that. So if it was connected again some way, it would actually get the same IP address. Going into scope options, we can see some properties that are required for my clients to be able to connect to the internet. For instance, we have the default gateway, or in this case router, which is my router. We also have DNS servers. I use my domain controller, a domain controller in Windows Azure, as well as Google's DNS. I also specified the domain name so that I can access my server resources more easily when connected to my home network. This is of course propagated to all computers. We also have policies, which is something that I don't use. You could use this to say that a specific manufacturer should have a specific kind of IP address or something like that. But as I said, I'm not using this. Server options is exactly the same thing as the scope options, but for all scopes on the server. Since I only use one, I haven't configured this. Policies is just like the policies specified in the scope. And filters can be used to deny specific manufacturers or MAC addresses from getting DHCP addresses. As you can see, this is disabled and I don't use these either. Going into the server properties, we can see that there is not a lot to look at. If we go into the scope, there are a bit more details that can be configured here, like the scope for instance. We also have the duration of the lease, and you can enter a description if you want to. Under DNS, there are some settings related to my DNS servers, which I haven't configured. This is all default. I don't use network address protection, so that's blank as well, and there are some advanced options here, which are all left as standard. So let's go ahead and set up our own DHCP server so that you can get the hang of getting started. We are now connected to a different server. This is my Kiwi game server, which I use for hosting game servers, pretty obviously. It runs TeamSpeak and a bunch of other things. But as it has a GUI, we should be able to install a DHCP server in a simple way. Go into Manage and select Add Roles and Features. We click Next a couple of times, select the server from the list. We only have one. And we go ahead and check the box for DHCP server. It will prompt us asking us to install the associated administration tools, and we'll do just that. Click Next a couple of more times, get some information about DHCP, and we're ready to install. I checked the box to automatically restart because I thought it was necessary. Turns out that it's not. And we click Install. When the installation is completed, you will see a notification in the Server Manager. If we click on it, we can see that they want us to run the post configuration wizard since the installation has completed. A wizard pops up and we're ready to start the configuration in the DHCP post install configuration wizard. First thing, you need to specify some credentials. I'm signing in as a domain administrator, so I think that the account should work just fine. We actually get a fail here, and that's because I messed up my first video, so this server is actually already authenticated to the AD. But it shouldn't impact the result of the video. But in your case, you should see a success. We'll close the wizard, and we should now be able to access the DHCP management tools from the Tools menu. As you can see, we have the option DHCP. For some reason, this takes a bit of time starting on this computer, despite it having quite a lot of memory for a server in my farm, at least. But when it appears, it works just fine. So we're going to go ahead and expand the window a bit so that we can see what's going on. And as you can see, the server is kiwigames01.kiwi.lo. If we start to expand the things, we will see that there's no scope configured. To fix this, I'm going to right click IPv4 and select New Scope. This starts another wizard. We can enter a name. We're just going to call this the TechNut scope, of course. And you enter the start and end IP addresses. This is of course completely up to you, but I'm going to use pretty much the same example as I showed you before. There's no right or wrong, except for that input, which we fixed pretty much. When you got everything under control, we're just going to leave the default net mask and hit next. The next thing that we need to do is specify exclusions. As we won't be using those, we won't enter anything here. You can also specify a delay if necessary, but in this case we don't need that either. Next is the lease period. Default, as I said before, is 8 days, and we're just going to leave it at that. Now it's time to configure the DHCP options. These are of course recommended if you want to be able to get on the internet. First up is the default gateway. This is my router, so I'm just going to enter the IP address and hit add. That's all there is to it, so we're going to go ahead and click next. The DNS servers are automatically pulled from AD, so you can see that I already have my domain controller as well as the Azure domain controller. But I also like adding the Google DNS because in theory that should allow me to connect if these servers are down for some reason. So I click add, and it tries to resolve that IP address and make sure that it responds, and is added as the third option. So of course these are processed in this order. Hitting next, we can configure Win servers. We're not going to go into that in this video, so we're just going to hit next. Do we want to activate the scope? Oh yes, we do. And finish. The scope has now been created, and by expanding it, we can see the properties. There are no clients connected to this network, of course. It will probably mess up my network if I don't remove this pretty quickly. There are no reservations. If you want to create one, we can do that by right-clicking, or you can actually do a bit of a shortcut by going into and finding the client that is connected and right-click it to create a reservation. It's a bit easier than entering the MAC address every time. We can see the scope options. There are no policies, server options and policies, of course, not configured, and the filters are disabled here as well. And there you have it, the basics of DHCP, how it works and how to get started. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.